Our final presentation is put on by my right-hand person, Suni Gayle, who somewhere along the line, I got a little inspiration to find out that we keep hearing about using of podcasts and going to be a part of Pathways. And every time I talk to somebody, oh yeah, I know about podcasts, but they didn't really know much about podcasts. They hadn't done them and they weren't very experienced. And so when I got someone who was willing to put together a presentation on something that probably a good number of our Toastmasters will be doing in the future, maybe this is going to be your first introduction to podcasts, but well, let Suni Gayle take it away and get us introduced to what podcasts are and how to go about them.
Thank you so much, Tom. I am going to be doing about 15 minutes introduction of podcasting, and I'll talk about the Toastmaster project. And then I have a special guest with me tonight, Arturo Godinez. He hosts a podcast and he'll talk about the actual experience of doing a podcast. And so I'll introduce him later on. I'm going to share my screen here. So in this presentation, I'm going to cover an introduction to podcasts, as I mentioned, the project, the level 4 elective, create a podcast, and then just 4 easy steps to begin podcasting if that's something you're interested in doing. So what is a podcast? Well, first of all, it's just a digital audio or video talk or presentation or interview. It's an electronic file that you basically upload to the internet, but you create a series of episodes or installments. Most people, I've seen podcast series as small as just 2 episodes, but typically they're ongoing episodes like 10 in a season, for example, or some people do it every week, maybe 25, 30 weeks out of the year. They can get to be quite large. What you'll do is you find a podcast you like, and then you subscribe to it. All of the apps that you can subscribe to have a very clear, easy to find button. And so then those episodes are now received automatically into your phone or your iPad or your computer, however you're accessing the podcast. And podcasts are free. Now, some of them may include ads, but typically there's going to be no charge for them. Who creates podcasts? Everyone. Everyone. If you have a favorite actor, politician, minister, a thought leader that you follow, they most likely have a podcast. Now, my favorite podcasts are from NPR. I used to listen to the radio. Now I just pick up their episodes of my favorite shows or the morning news. I have several thought leaders that I follow. And then if you just do a search, you'll find that there are a lot of average, quote unquote, average people who have created a podcast and are sharing their opinions on whatever the topic is. So what kinds of top podcasts are there? Again, everything. Everyone is talking about everything in a podcast. Now, this is a screenshot from Apple's iTunes. This is how I listen to podcasts on my computer. On my phone or my iPad, I'll use the Apple Podcast app. And if you're not an Apple fan, if you have an Android device, here are the top providers. They're called directories, podcast directories. As you can see, Apple Podcast is #1. Almost half of people who listen are doing it through Apple. Spotify is #2 though. And so if you're an Android user, Spotify might be a good choice for you. So if you're looking for a podcast just to get started, this is from Darren LaCroix and Mark Brown, 2 of the world champions of public speaking, called Unforgettable Presentations. They have 100 episodes and all of them are just excellent speaking tips and how to present. Again, you can download any of the podcast directory apps on your phone and then just Google Darren or Google unforgettable presentations, and then you'll always have them with you. I like to listen to podcasts when I drive, for example. Now, the Pathways Level 4 project is an elective project. So it's not one of the required ones. You don't have to do this. And it comes with the project that you can download as well as the evaluation, as you would expect. They do provide a couple other tools. One is a cheat sheet called Podcasting Basics, and then they offer a podcast organizer worksheet. I'll be honest, these tools are a little bit simple. If you're serious about getting into podcasting, then I would do a Google search and you'll find a lot of really great free resources. But if you're just putting together your project just for the purposes of your club meeting, then these tools will work. There is a section in the project that says create a podcast competencies, and these are the skills that you're going to learn. One of the things I wanted to point out here, though, is this bottom one. Upload podcasts to the internet for distribution to listeners. I saw that and I thought, oh my word, they're making us upload the podcast to a hosting service. That's not only time consuming and requires technical expertise, but it also costs money. And I was shocked at that. And then when I read it again and read it a little bit closer, the requirements for the project, which are different from the competencies, the requirement is that you need to record 60 minutes of podcast content. You can do it divided any way you choose, but each episode should be at least 10 minutes. And then you need to present a 7 to 13 minute speech at your club where you're going to introduce the podcast in 2 to 3 minutes, and then you're going to play 5 to 7 minutes of the episode you recorded. So while the competency says you should upload it to the internet, the requirement is that you only have to play it for your club. You don't actually have to upload it. So that's the level 4 project. It is a lot of work, I think, for level 4 elective. I don't see too many people doing this because it does require some technical expertise to record and then edit and all of that kind of stuff. And if you really wanted to do a good job, that's a lot of work. And so unless you're really wanting to do a podcast for real, I might move on and choose an easier elective. However, if you do want to begin podcasting, number 1, here are the 4 steps. You're going to create the podcast. And then once you have the episodes, then you have to upload them to a podcast hosting service. And there is a monthly fee for this. I've seen it anywhere from about $10 a month up to $85 or more, depending on the size of your files and the quantity and the number of listeners. But if you, for example, if you Googled how to do a podcast, one of the things that comes up is podcasters.apple.com. So these are instructions for people who want to post in the Apple directory, and they give you a list of hosts that they work with, that they partner with. Of course, there are many hosting providers out there. So you've uploaded to the hosting service, then you have to apply and submit your podcast to the podcast directory. Here again, I've listed Apple, but as I showed you previously, you have several options. There's Apple, Spotify, Castbox, Google, and so on. So you can pick which directory you want to be in. Obviously, the most reach is going to be through Apple Podcasts currently. And then the last step is you would just publish new episodes as they become available. So it looks very simple. It's actually technically challenging. There are a lot of special things that you have to do to the files, and you have to tag and do different things like that. So I think for the average person, unless you really are trying to get your message out there and you feel like the podcast is the way to do it, this is not as easy as it might appear here. Are there any questions?
My first thought might be that if it becomes something of interest to a district, they might find someone who is particularly excited about it, to be the district resource that people from the whole district can go to help them get going on it. But you did say there is, no matter what, there'll be some kind of a cost to have your broadcast as a podcast.
Yes. There are monthly fees associated.
I'd love to share, if I may. This is Kimberly Smith Austin.
Please do.
I have two podcasts that I have been running now for almost 2 years. And initially, when I got onto the podcasting platform, I did pay for a service that cost me as little as $5 a month. However, after looking for ways to fine tune my podcast, I did find a resource that I love to share with everyone. It's called Anchor, like an anchor that on a boat, .fm. Anchor.fm is a free, yes, I said free podcasting host. And they put your podcast on 7 different platforms without any action other than hitting publish. I absolutely love Anchor because it goes directly to Apple, directly to Spotify, Google Play, what's the other one? Stitcher, Overcast, a host of them. And I don't have to do anything else. When I was on Libsyn, I had to manually do the work to put them on the other platforms. Anchor.fm does it automatically and they're searchable. The only thing is you don't really have control of your RSS feed, which is another high level term that if you wanted to post and put it elsewhere. For example, I was just putting mine on Amazon because they now host podcasts. I had to get the RSS feed from Anchor in order to do that. But that is a resource that's out there for those of you that are interested in podcasting. There is a free resource out there, and it's amazing, by the way. That's all.
Thank you so much, Kimberly.
My pleasure.
Any other comments before I introduce Art? Right. I don't see any hands. Well, I am so excited to have my friend and coworker here tonight. His name is Art Godinez, and he is one of the co-founders and co-host of the podcast A Kiss Like Yours, which is now in its 2nd year. The focus is on family, sex, movies, dating, travel, kids, and the kitchen sink. And they talk about the ups and downs of marriage to help their listeners and to help themselves. And there are things that they wish they knew before they got married that now they get to pass on. I've listened to a couple episodes and it is very interesting and very entertaining. One of the things I love is that Art is very authentic in the podcast. And so what you're hearing there is also the guy that I know. So please help me welcome Art Godinez.
Thanks, Sunny. Happy to be here, guys. Excited to talk to everybody.
Do you have anything you want to share before I start asking you questions?
No, I just thank Kimberly for bringing that up. I was definitely going to mention Anchor. We are also hosted by Anchor, and I can second everything that she said. They've been amazing. All of it is free, so it's not financially cumbersome to get started. And obviously, with the complexity, you can scale it up as you want, but absolutely not as involved as some of maybe the other more top producing podcasts may be that you might think it's not as complicated as you might think.
Great. So Art, what made you decide to get into podcasting and how did you choose this theme?
So it's kind of a funny story. We had a talk about what to do for our fantasy football league, actually. I wanted to just get something going for our fantasy football league and just spice it up a little. So I started doing this podcast. And again, I got on Anchor. I got on these headphones that you're seeing right here. So there was no additional cost there. I set up my account and I hit the record button. But in talking with my wife, she enjoyed listening and she actually wanted to participate. So we started doing it I started doing the podcast with her. And then she said, you know what? Maybe we should do something a little bit more meaningful with our time. I get that it's fantasy football, but let's start to actually use our time to help out folks that maybe need some help in the relationship area. We had previously hosted through our church a young adult and a young married couples or seriously dating couples group. And so he said, you know what, we had a lot of fun with that. Let's just continue down that relationship sort of theme, family, marriage, sex, kids, travel, because we both come from broken families, and we said, you know what, we want to do and pour into our relationship as much as possible. And one of the things is that we always kind of hold on and keep in mind is that we always say that our family and our relationships, like when you ask somebody what's the most thing that's important to you, and they say, oh, my family, right? The problem is that when we take a look at our time and our resources, where we're not putting that the most in our time and resources is with that family. So that's part of what our motivation is, to make sure that we're pouring into our family, and then we're also helping others. And it's great, like you said, Suni, it's intentional that you hear that it's raw and it's just me, and we're talking and we're fighting on the like literally we're going through an argument, like you pissed me off, and you know, I really appreciate you with this, and so the reason for that is when your podcast needs to be real, it needs to be genuine, and people can tell when you are not being genuine very easily, especially when it's just audio and you just hear that voice, the inflection in your voice, and they don't really see you all that much. So that was a long-winded answer to just say, hey, you know what, we really just wanted to give back and pour into others.
Oh, that was excellent. I didn't realize you had started out with fantasy football, and then I love how it morphed into something more meaningful. Thank you so much for that. So what is your process then for creating the episodes? I mean, how long does it take to create an episode?
Well, we usually talk about an hour, and it's funny, we used to talk about a half hour, and then once you kind of get into it, the more you know how to bounce things off of each other, or there's topics that you want to get to, the longer you start to go, and it gets a little bit easier. But we record for about an hour. We do about an hour of post, which means that we're editing and we're actually uploading our episode to Anchor. And our editing is very, very basic. Again, we try not to cut out, you know, the rawness of the episode. Typically what we're cutting out is sometimes the kids come in, right, and they're yelling and screaming and asking for, I have 2 daughters that are under 6 years old, so they want a snack, or the dog starts barking, right? And so we're recording in our living room, or our dining room. So those are the type of things that we kind of cut out just to kind of keep, you know, the distraction piece out. But other than that, we don't make any real edits to what is being said. So there's not much effort there, but it does take about an hour extra to get all that squared away and uploaded. So about 2 hours, I would say, per episode.
Do you decide what you're going to talk about beforehand?
Yes and no. So that's kind of a good question, because we do have general themes that we're going to talk about, but there's times where it happens all the time where we're driving down, you know, the freeway, and we go, hey, I asked my wife a question, and then we'll start getting to this conversation and be like, no, stop, write it down, and we'll talk about it on the podcast. You know, so it ends up being like, yes, we do know generally what we're talking about, but we're not scripted, and we just sort of hit talking points as we go along.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Okay, so what apps are you using to record and edit?
So Anchor is a great one. If you're just getting started, Anchor is probably the most user friendly. Because we have invested in some more equipment, I would say, right? To the mics.
I'm sorry. Before you go on, can you edit in Anchor?
I typically don't, but I think from my experience, we can just record straight. I think there may be some editing capabilities, but I don't use Anchor for editing. So what we would do is record off of my equipment, and then that gets uploaded into a program called Audacity. That program is free, and you can upload your podcast to Audacity, do your editing, your cut, your paste, and we can add, cool little things like our theme music and our outro, things like that. And then we can take that file, upload it into Anchor, and you have a podcast.
Okay. Wow, that sounds simple enough. And so what advice would you give to someone who's thinking about starting a podcast?
If you're thinking about starting a podcast, start it. Start it, because that's the biggest hurdle to get over, is just actually starting it. You can go to Anchor right now, like I said, download the app, put in your profile, and literally connect the headphones onto your phone and just start talking, and having, really what it is just a conversation. And that fantasy football podcast was really just me talking to myself. There's nobody else around. So, get into your special reading place or a quiet place and just start talking and pretending like somebody else is there with you, asking rhetorical questions and doing those kinds of things. And you have a podcast. So that's my biggest advice, is just to start out. It'll get as complicated as you want it to, but it can also be as simple as you want it to.
See, I think he's talking to you, Tom and Connie. I'm ready to hear your podcast.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts to throw out here, and as I said, they're just right out of the box. But here's a couple of thoughts. I have a debate club. Every month we do something really controversial. So we pick the most controversial topics we can come up with. Would it be possible to record and use a different one from each monthly meeting? If maybe you assemble 10 or 12 of them, and each week you have a different debate topic. And the way the debaters do it is they don't know what side of the issue they are. There's a topic and they're just going to do it. And I think it'd be of interest to people to hear about various topics. The second one, Suni, you might want to think about this one, and would be able to have, for instance, our qualified speakers do their presentations and have a different one each week or month or whatever it is, schedule them to do those. And then maybe people would see them and get interested in Toastmasters, or if nothing else, our speakers would have an audience.
Yeah, a lot of possibilities there. Frankie Jones has asked a question in the chat. What recording equipment do you use?
Well, I use, we have a couple of different things. I have a mixer called Rodecaster, and that Rodecaster is designed a lot for multiple mics. So I can have up to 4 people on one podcast at a time, which we have episodes with 4 people. It gets a little hairy because, there's 4 people talking and trying to get their point across and laughing and arguing and that whole thing. So that's pretty complex. So I have that sort of a mixer that brings all of the mics together. I also have microphones. We have cords to plug in from the microphone into the mixer. We also have pop filters. So pop filters is something that we use for sound quality. So the P's, you get that pop sound when you hear it in the speakers. It helps to reduce some of that. Outside of that, that's pretty much it. So maybe some headphones so we can hear. Outside of that, I think that's pretty much it. So the high level equipment, obviously we need a computer or some sort of application to be able to upload. So we need software in that regard. But again, it doesn't need to be that complex. If you're going to just start out, maybe 1, 2 mics at a time, and you're all set. There's plenty of really good videos on YouTube that help you piece together those equipment questions, because again, they go from high end to low end, and you can really scale however you really want to. And there's a lot of good information on YouTube about podcasting.
Great, thank you, Art. Any other questions for Art? Any questions in general? All right, well, Art, thank you so much again for being here and for sharing that great information. I think it just really made such a difference to have somebody who's actually podcasting share with us. So thank you very much. And please feel free to join us anytime. We meet on the first Wednesday of every month.
Thanks, guys. I'll leave you with the outro that we have every single week on our podcast, and that's going to do it for us this week. We'll catch you guys on the next one.
Back to you, Mr. Jameson.
Okay, thank you, Sunny, for putting together that program. We all know, I'm sure, a whole lot more about doing podcasts, and we'll let those juices flow in our brains and think about creative ways to do that. And maybe a few that are thinking about doing that will get stimulated to do that and even report back to us that this was maybe the inspiration that got them going.